We've all seen them, the invisible people who keep the world turning while the elite look right through them. The janitors, the couriers, the maids. We're taught from a young age to treat everyone with respect, but in the high-stakes, cutthroat world of corporate greed, some people view humility as a weakness and a uniform as an invitation to cruelty. But what happens when the person holding the mop is secretly the smartest mind in the room? What happens when the elite push their cruelty just an inch too far, unaware that the scales of power are about to tip? Today, we are diving deep into 3 jaw-dropping chronicles of ultimate workplace revenge. These aren't just stories of survival, they are masterclasses in poetic justice. We begin with our first tale, a story of a brilliant woman discarded like trash by an arrogant tech executive, only for him to realize too late that he didn't just fire his maid, he handed her the keys to his entire empire. To the executives at Apex Global Logistics, Clara was just a ghost in a blue uniform. She was the woman who emptied the recycling bins, wiped the permanent marker off the glass whiteboards, and replaced the premium espresso pods in the executive lounge. To Julian Vance, the senior vice president of operations, she was even less than that. She was a minor inconvenience. Julian was a man defined by his tailored suits, his booming, intimidating voice, and a deep-seated insecurity that he masked with absolute tyranny. He treated the corporate headquarters as his personal fiefdom, and the cleaning staff bore the brunt of his volatile moods. If a trash can wasn't lined perfectly, he would tip it over onto the floor and make the custodian clean it up again while he watched. What Julian didn't know, because he never bothered to look at Clara's face, let alone ask for her last name, was that Clara held a master's degree in data science and predictive analytics from one of the top universities in the country. 2 years prior, Clara's life had collapsed. Her father had fallen terminally ill, racking up catastrophic medical debts. To keep him alive, Clara had taken out massive loans, maxed out her credit cards, and eventually had to pause her doctoral studies. When he passed away, she was left broke, drowning in debt, and blacklisted by a predatory former employer who threatened legal action if she worked for a competitor. Desperate for a steady paycheck that wouldn't trigger a non-compete lawsuit, she took a night shift cleaning job at Apex. It was mind-numbing, exhausting work, but it kept a roof over her head. Clara didn't mind the hard work, but she despised the cruelty. And Julian Vance was cruelty personified. The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. Julian was hosting a high-profile cocktail mixer in the executive boardroom for potential international investors. The room was packed with billionaires, venture capitalists, and board members. Clara was quietly moving through the crowd, collecting empty champagne flutes and wiping down surfaces. Julian was in the middle of a grand speech, gesturing wildly with a glass of red wine, when he bumped into Clara's cart. A few drops of Cabernet splashed onto the cuff of his pristine white shirt. The room went dead silent. Julian's face flushed a deep, angry crimson. Instead of apologizing for backing into her, he lashed out. "Are you completely blind?" Julian roared, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Look at this. This shirt costs more than you make in a fiscal quarter, you clumsy idiot." "I'm incredibly sorry, Mr. Vance," Clara said calmly, keeping her eyes downcast to avoid escalating his temper. "Let me get a club soda and a cloth, it will come right out." "Get your hands off me," Julian snapped, shoving her hands away. He looked around the room, playing to the crowd of wealthy onlookers. This is what happens when you hire from the bottom of the barrel. No situational awareness. No intelligence. Just mindless drones cluttering up a workspace meant for people who actually contribute to society. He grabbed a stack of printed, confidential logistical reports from the boardroom table, documents Clara had spent the last week quietly reading and analyzing while dusting his desk, and threw them onto the floor at her feet. "Clean it up," Julian sneered. "And consider yourself fired. I want your badge on my desk by midnight. People like you don't belong in a building like this." A few of Julian's sycophants laughed. Clara felt the sting of tears in her eyes, but she didn't cry. Instead, as she knelt on the cold floor to pick up the papers, she looked at the data printed on the pages. Her brilliant, analytical mind instantly spotted a massive, glaring anomaly in the supply chain projections Julian was pitching to the investors. Julian's highly praised logistical algorithm was fundamentally flawed. It was bleeding cash in dead-zone shipping lanes, masked only by creative accounting. Clara stood up, stacked the papers neatly, looked Julian dead in the eye for the first time, and said, "You're right, Mr. Vance. I don't belong here." She walked out, handed in her badge, and went home. But she didn't sleep. Using the public data available on Apex's shipping routes, combined with the internal metrics she had memorized during her months of cleaning Julian's office, Clara spent the next 3 weeks building a rival logistical framework. She called it the Phoenix Protocol. It was an elegant, hyper-efficient AI-driven algorithm that optimized shipping routes in real time, cutting overhead costs by a staggering 42%. Clara took her prototype to Vanguard Holdings, a massive private equity firm known for hostile takeovers of failing tech and logistics giants. The partners at Vanguard were skeptical when a woman whose resume listed her last job as a corporate maid walked into the boardroom. But the moment Clara initiated the live simulation, demonstrating how her algorithm could completely obsolete Apex Global's current infrastructure, the room went completely silent. Vanguard didn't just buy the algorithm, they backed Clara entirely. They created a subsidiary tech firm, appointed Clara as the CEO, and gave her a multi-million-dollar war chest with one specific directive: disrupt the logistics market. Over the next 18 months, Clara's company systematically stripped Apex Global of its clients. One by one, major shipping conglomerates abandoned Apex for Clara's cheaper, faster, and more reliable platform. Apex's stock plummeted. Julian Vance, desperate to save his own skin, tried to patch his failing software, but his lack of technical understanding only made the glitches worse. By the summer of 2026, Apex Global Logistics was on the brink of bankruptcy. Their board of directors voted frantically to accept a buyout offer from an anonymous investment group represented by Vanguard Holdings. The day of the official acquisition arrived. Julian Vance, desperate to preserve his position as senior VP, spent hours preparing a presentation to impress the new, mysterious owner. He needed this job. His own aggressive stock options had been wiped out by the crash. The boardroom at Apex looked exactly as it had the night Clara was fired. The same glass tables, the same panoramic views of the city. Julian stood at the head of the table, flanked by the remaining board members, nervously adjusting his tie. The heavy mahogany doors opened. A woman stepped inside, flanked by a legal team and 2 private security guards. She wore a tailored charcoal gray power suit, her hair perfectly styled, walking with absolute authority. Julian's breath hitched in his throat. He blinked, rubbing his eyes, convinced he was hallucinating. The face was familiar, but the posture, the aura of pure power, was completely alien. "No way," Julian whispered, his face turning pale. "You." Clara walked to the head of the table, directly opposite Julian. She didn't sit down. She simply placed her leather briefcase on the table. "Good morning, gentlemen," Clara said, her voice smooth, calm, and utterly commanding. "For those of you who don't know me, my name is Clara Henderson. I am the CEO of Phoenix Systems, and as of 8 a.m. this morning, I own 51% of Apex Global Logistics." The board members immediately began murmuring, smiling, and nodding, eager to please their new boss. Julian, however, looked like he had just seen a ghost. His hands were trembling. "Clara?" Julian stammered, his arrogant composure completely shattering. The cleaning lady? This has to be a joke. You can't buy this company." Clara smiled, a cold, razor-sharp expression. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of paper, sliding it across the long glass table. It slid perfectly, stopping right in front of Julian. It was a termination notice. "Mr. Vance," Clara said, her voice echoing in the dead silent room, mirroring the exact tone he had used on her nearly 2 years ago. "Your logistical models are archaic, your leadership has cost this company hundreds of millions of dollars, and quite frankly, you lack the situational awareness and intelligence required for a modern workspace. Julian looked down at the paper, then up at Clara, his eyes wide with terror and humiliation. Clara, please. I have a mortgage, I have a reputation in this city. You can't just throw me out. I'm not just throwing you out, Julian, Clara said softly, leaning forward. I'm restructuring. People like you don't belong in a building like this. She turned to her security team. Please escort Mr. Vance out of the building immediately. And ensure he leaves his badge on my desk. As the security guards grabbed Julian by the arms and led him out of the boardroom, his frantic pleas fading down the hallway, Clara sat down at the head of the table. She looked at the stunned, terrified faces of the remaining board members. Now, Clara said, opening her laptop. Let's clean up this mess. Julian Vance learned the hard way that the people you look down on today are often the ones looking down on you tomorrow. But while Clara's revenge was a calculated masterclass in corporate chess, our next story takes us out of the tech suites and into the cutthroat world of luxury real estate, where elite status is everything, and appearances are weaponized. In this next chronicle of ultimate workplace revenge, we meet a woman who was treated like dirt by a family of old money snobs. They thought a uniform meant a lack of ambition. They were dead wrong. Let's dive into story 2. The heiress in the apron. To the Sterling family, the world was divided into two categories, those who owned the grand estates of Newport Coast, and those who dusted them. Victoria Sterling was the matriarch of this dynasty, a woman whose face was frozen in a perpetual expression of mild disgust, as if the rest of humanity smelled faintly of sour milk. Her husband, Richard, was a ruthless real estate mogul whose company, Sterling Crest Holdings, controlled the most lucrative luxury residential listings in the state. Together with their 20-something son, Chad, a walking cliché of trust fund arrogance and pastel polo shirts, they viewed their domestic staff not as employees, but as necessary furniture. And then there was Elena. Elena was 19 years old when she started working as a live-in maid at the Sterling's 12,000-square-foot oceanfront mansion. She was quiet, meticulously thorough, and completely unassuming. She wore her hair tied back in a severe bun, wore no makeup, and moved through the house like a shadow, keeping the silver polished and the Turkish rugs pristine. To Chad Sterling, Elena was a favorite target for sport. He took immense pleasure in creating unnecessary work for her. He would deliberately track muddy boots across a freshly scrubbed marble foyer, laughing as he told her, "Missed a spot, Ellie. Keep grinding, maybe one day you'll afford a used Honda." Victoria was no better. She would leave expensive diamond rings on countertops as a psychological trap, waiting to see if Elena would steal them, or accuse her of scratching delicate crystal glassware that had been flawed for a decade. Elena endured it all with a serene, unbothered nod, uttering only 3 words in response to their cruelty: "Yes, Mrs. Sterling." The family assumed Elena stayed because she was desperate, uneducated, and trapped by poverty. They couldn't have been more wrong. Elena wasn't working at the Sterling estate because she needed the minimum wage paycheck. She was there because of a secret her father, Arthur Pendleton, had kept until his dying day. Arthur had been Richard Sterling's original business partner 30 years ago. In the early days of their venture, Richard had brutally defrauded Arthur, falsifying corporate records to strip him of his shares just before the company went public. Arthur was left ruined, while Richard used the stolen capital to build the Sterling Crest empire. When Arthur passed away, he left Elena a cardboard box filled with old diaries, microfilmed bank ledgers, and a burning desire for justice. Elena knew that the proof of Richard's historical fraud was hidden somewhere within his private home office, a room protected by a biometric lock and a fierce sense of paranoia. Taking the job as a maid was the only way inside. For 14 months, Elena played the part of the submissive servant. She cleaned, she scrubbed, and she observed. She memorized the security guard schedules. She watched the reflection in the hallway mirror as Richard punched in his override codes. She learned exactly which floorboards creaked and which security cameras had blind spots. The climax of her time at the Sterling estate occurred during their annual midsummer gala. It was the most exclusive social event of the year, attended by governors, celebrities, and billionaires. The mansion was ablaze with fairy lights, and a classical quartet played by the infinity pool. Elena was tasked with serving champagne on the crowded patio. Chad, thoroughly intoxicated and trying to impress a group of wealthy socialites, decided to use Elena for entertainment. As Elena walked past with a silver tray of vintage Dom Perignon, Chad deliberately stuck his foot out. Elena tripped, falling hard onto the stone patio. The silver tray clattered loudly, and a dozen crystal flutes shattered, soaking her uniform and splashing champagne all over Victoria's custom designer gown. The patio erupted into gasps. Victoria let out a piercing shriek. "You clumsy, incompetent peasant!" Victoria screamed, slapping the remaining glass out of Elena's hand. "Look at my dress. Do you have any idea what this costs? More than your entire family makes in a lifetime." Chad erupted into boisterous laughter, pointing at her. "Hey Dad, look! The help forgot how to walk. Maybe we should get her a leash." Richard walked over, looking down at Elena with cold, unfeeling eyes. "Pick up the glass with your hands, Elena. Clean up every drop. And when you are finished, pack your trash and get off my property. You are a stain on this house." Elena sat on the ground, pieces of shattered glass cutting into her palms. She looked up at the three of them, surrounded by a ring of wealthy elite who simply stared with detached amusement. Elena didn't beg. She didn't cry. She slowly stood up, ignoring the blood dripping from her hand, and looked Richard Sterling straight in the eye. "The mess will be cleaned, Mr. Sterling," Elena said, her voice remarkably steady. "Completely." She walked away, but she didn't pack her bags. Instead, while the entire household, including the security staff, was distracted by the chaos of the gala and Victoria's wardrobe emergency, Elena slipped up the back staircase to Richard's private office. Using the bypass code she had spent months deciphering, she unlocked the door. She bypassed the internal safe using a specialized decryption drive she had purchased with every cent of her maid's salary, and within 10 minutes, she found it, the original 1996 partnership termination agreement, complete with Richard's forged signature of her father, alongside the secret offshore account details used to hide the stolen funds. Elena downloaded the files, wiped her digital footprint, slipped out the back door, and vanished into the night. The next morning, Richard Sterling woke up to find his maid gone, but he didn't care. He figured she had fled out of shame. He had no idea the fuse had been lit. Elena took the evidence straight to the federal authorities and the Securities and Exchange Commission. But she didn't stop there. She didn't just want Richard in prison, she wanted the entire Sterling legacy dismantled. She contacted a massive international real estate conglomerate based in Tokyo that had been looking for an entry point into the American luxury market. Armed with her inside knowledge of Sterling Crest's vulnerabilities, she convinced them to back her in forming a shell corporation called Pendleton Holdings. Over the next year, the feds quietly built their case. When the hammer dropped, it was devastating. Richard Sterling was arrested on charges of historic fraud, insider trading, and tax evasion. The news hit the press like a tsunami. Sterling Crest Holdings stock collapsed overnight. Investors panicked, clients pulled their multi-million-dollar listings, and lenders called in their massive debts. To avoid total liquidation and save themselves from absolute bankruptcy, the board of directors at Sterling Crest, now stripped of an incarcerated Richard, agreed to an emergency corporate acquisition. A mysterious entity known as Pendleton Holdings offered to buy out the failing company for pennies on the dollar, assuming all their debts. The signing ceremony took place at the Sterling Crest corporate headquarters. Victoria and Chad, stripped of their assets and facing financial ruin, were forced to attend to sign over their remaining family shares. Chad sat at the conference table, his polo shirt replaced by a wrinkled suit, looking defeated and angry. Victoria was weeping softly into a tissue. "Who is this Pendleton person?" Victoria whined to the lawyers. "They are stripping us of everything. Our name, our house, our cars. The double doors of the boardroom swung open. Elena walked in. Her hair was down in elegant, cascading waves. She wore an impeccable white designer suit, the very same color Victoria had worn the night she humiliated her, and diamonds glittered at her throat. She carried herself with the grace of a true queen. Chad's mouth fell open. He stood up so fast his chair flipped over backward. You. What the hell is this? What are you doing here? Victoria gasped, dropping her tissue. The maid? This is impossible. Elena walked to the head of the table, sitting down in the high-backed leather CEO chair. She crossed her legs elegantly and looked at the family who had treated her like garbage. Hello, Victoria. Hello, Chad, Elena said, her voice dripping with calm, icy confidence. I believe you are familiar with my family name. Pendleton. My father was Arthur Pendleton, the man your husband robbed to build this very room. The room fell into an absolute, suffocating silence. You set us up, Chad whispered, his face completely devoid of color. No, Chad. Your father set you up when he chose to be a thief. You set yourselves up when you chose to treat human beings like dirt, Elena said. She slid a stack of legal documents across the table. These are the final eviction notices for the Newport Coast mansion. Since Pendleton Holdings now owns the property, and you are no longer affiliated with this company, you have 48 hours to vacate. Victoria and Chad Sterling learned the hard way that when you strip away the designer clothes and the stolen millions, arrogance is a very fragile shield. But our final story takes us into a different arena entirely, the high-stakes, pressure cooker world of haute cuisine. In this world, celebrity chefs are treated like gods, and the kitchen staff are treated like modern-day servants. But our next protagonist wasn't just a maid cleaning up after a temperamental culinary genius, she was a woman possessing a rare, generational talent that money simply couldn't buy. Let's close out our compilation with Story 3, The Recipe for Ruin. The culinary elite of New York City, L'Etoile was a temple of gastronomy. It boasted 3 Michelin stars, a 6-month waiting list, and a menu that cost more than a month's rent for the average citizen. At the center of this temple was chef Jean-Luc Laurent. Jean-Luc was a man whose genius was matched only by his monstrous ego. He ran his kitchen through a regime of terror. Pots were thrown, insults were screamed, and the slightest imperfection in a plating line could result in a cook being publicly humiliated and fired on the spot. To Jean-Luc, Maya was just a pair of hands assigned to the lowest, most grueling tasks in the restaurant. Maya was hired as part of the overnight sanitation and prep crew. While the city slept, Maya scrubbed the industrial ovens, scoured the copper pots until they gleamed like mirrors, and prepped the meticulously precise vegetable dicing for the daytime line cooks. But Maya was far from an uneducated laborer. She was the daughter of a legendary, reclusive French chef, Henri Rousseau, who had passed away years prior. Henri had been Jean-Luc's original mentor in Paris. Jean-Luc had been a mediocre cook until he stole Henri's private notebook, a leather-bound journal containing a secret, revolutionary fermentation technique and a collection of master recipes that would later form the entire backbone of L'Etoile's legendary menu. Jean-Luc built his empire on stolen genius, leaving Henri to die in obscurity. Maya had taken the night cleaning job at L'Etoile for one reason, to take back her father's legacy. For nearly 2 years, Maya worked the night shift. She endured the grueling physical toll, but more than that, she endured Jean-Luc's personal malice. Jean-Luc would often arrive early in the morning, furious and hungover, looking for someone to take his anger out on. If he found a single speck of dust on a copper pan, he would throw it across the kitchen, forcing Maya to drop to her knees and clean the station all over again. "You are a peasant, Maya," Jean-Luc would sneer, blowing cigarette smoke in her direction. "Your hands are meant for scrubbing toilets, not touching a culinary workspace. Remember your place." Maya would keep her head bowed, her voice soft. "Yes, chef." But during the quiet hours of the night, while scrubbing the floors of Jean-Luc's private office, Maya was gathering her ingredients. She knew that Jean-Luc's contract with his primary financial backers, the Horizon Hospitality Group, was up for renewal. The backers were growing tired of Jean-Luc's volatile behavior and skyrocketing overhead costs. They stayed only because of the restaurant's signature dish, Le Sang de la Terre, a complex, deeply guarded truffle and just reduction that Jean-Luc claimed as his own masterpiece. The breaking point arrived on the night of the restaurant's 20th anniversary. The dining room was packed with the world's top food critics, including the notoriously harsh food reviewer for the New York Times, and the executive board of Horizon Hospitality. Jean-Luc was in a state of manic panic. In his stress, he had miscalculated the prep schedule and demanded that the night crew stay late into the evening shift to help wash dishes and chop mirepoix in the back. Maya was carrying a heavy crate of heirloom tomatoes through the chaotic, high-pressure kitchen when Jean-Luc, spinning around to yell at a line cook, collided with her. The tomatoes spilled everywhere, rolling across the pristine, stainless steel floor. Jean-Luc exploded. He grabbed a ladle of hot duck fat and threw it at Maya's feet, the hot liquid splashing against her heavy work boots. "You stupid, clumsy cow!" Jean-Luc shrieked, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. He grabbed her by the collar of her stained apron, dragging her into the center of the kitchen in front of all his staff and the open-view window where VIP guests could see. "You are ruining my night. Look at this trash. You are nothing but a worthless maid. You don't belong in a kitchen of this caliber." He grabbed a permanent marker from a cook's station, drew a massive, ugly X across her apron, and shoved her toward the exit. "You are fired. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for sabotaging my kitchen." Jean-Luc roared. Maya stumbled back, maintaining her balance. She looked at the terrified line cooks, then at Jean-Luc, whose chest was heaving with arrogant rage. She slowly untied the marked apron, dropped it onto the floor, and looked at the man who had built a career on her father's stolen life. "A master relies on his talent, Jean-Luc," Maya said, her voice piercing through the hum of the kitchen. "A fraud relies on a stolen notebook. Let's see how well you cook without either." She walked out the back door into the crisp night air. She didn't look back. The next morning, Maya met with the executive board of Horizon Hospitality. She didn't come empty-handed. She brought her father's original, dated journals, complete with the authentic, handwritten recipes for every single signature dish Latoile possessed, proving indisputably that Jean-Luc had committed intellectual property theft and fraud. But Maya brought something even more powerful, a business plan. Supported by her own immense, inherited culinary talent, she presented a blueprint for a new restaurant concept that utilized her father's authentic techniques at a fraction of Jean-Luc's bloated operating costs. Horizon Hospitality didn't hesitate. Facing a massive scandal if the fraud came to light, they quietly triggered a morality and intellectual property clause in their contract with Jean-Luc, pulling all their funding. Overnight, Latoile was stripped of its financial backing. Lenders panicked, suppliers refused to deliver on credit, and within 3 months, the legendary restaurant was forced to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Maya's newly formed culinary group, backed fully by Horizon, bought out the bankrupt asset for pennies on the dollar. 6 months later, the restaurant reopened under a new name, Maison Rousseau. On opening night, Jean-Luc Laurent, now broke, disgraced, and blacklisted by the entire culinary world, managed to sneak past the front-of-house staff. He was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, driven mad by the desire to see who had taken his empire from him. He burst through the kitchen doors, expecting to find a corporate executive. Instead, he found a bustling, immaculate kitchen running like a flawless symphony. And standing at the pass, wearing a pristine, custom chef's jacket with the name Chef Maya Rousseau embroidered in gold, was his former maid. Jean-Luc stopped dead in his tracks, his jaw dropping. "You. Maya? No, this is a nightmare. You were just the cleaning girl." Maya turned around calmly, holding a plating tweezer. She looked at the broken man standing before her. "I was a maid because I wanted to see how a fraud ran a kitchen, Jean-Luc," Maya said, her voice echoing over the sizzle of the pans. But this kitchen belongs to my father's legacy now. Your stolen recipes have returned to their rightful owner. Jean-Luc took a step forward, his voice cracking. Maya, please, you cannot do this to me. I made this place. Give me a position. Let me be a consultant. I have nothing left. Maya looked down at the floor, where a dropped piece of parchment paper lay near his scuffed shoes. She smiled, a cold, elegant expression of pure victory. I'm sorry, Jean-Luc, Maya said softly. But your cooking is archaic, your behavior is a liability, and quite frankly, you lack the talent required for a modern kitchen. You don't belong in a workspace meant for people who actually create. She turned to her sous chef. Please escort Mr. Laurent out to the alley. And make sure he doesn't take any trash with him on the way out. As security dragged the sobbing, broken former celebrity chef out into the rainy New York night, Maya turned back to the plating line, placing the final garnish on a flawless dish. The kitchen was finally hers, from the high-tech corporate suites of Apex Global to the luxury estates of Newport Coast, and finally to the elite kitchens of New York City. These three extraordinary women proved one immutable truth: never mistake someone's humility for a lack of ambition, and never treat the people who keep your world running as if they are invisible. Workplace revenge isn't just about getting even, it's about balancing the scales of justice and showing the bullies of the world that the higher you climb on a mountain of arrogance, the harder you fall when the foundation is pulled out from under you. But what do you think? Which of these three incredible women had the most satisfying revenge story? Was it Clara's algorithmic takeover, Elena's family justice, or Maya's culinary reclamation? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you love these stories of ultimate poetic justice, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next deep dive into the world's most dramatic chronicles. Until next time, remember to watch your step, because the person holding the mop today might just be your boss tomorrow.